As much as I'd like to be able to tell you that the new Škoda Vision GT, as the long-awaited debut of the brand, for those of us who are fans of it, is the best thing since sliced bread and single-handedly could change anyone's mind about Vision GT cars, sometimes that just isn't the case, and it really is a shame, because I've been talking about Škoda coming to Gran Turismo for quite a while. I know many of you are fans of Škoda as well, especially in the rally world, which, as I've alluded to before, I think I actually talked about this in my review for 1.46 overall a few days back, it doesn't really make as much sense to me to feature a Vision GT which goes in for Škoda's sports car racing heritage. Like, sure, it's fair enough, it's cool, but at the same time they're known far more so for rally, so leaning into that rally side I think would have been more fun. And also, if you think of it this way, imagine, and obviously this is just revisionist what-if history, but bear with me for a moment, imagine if instead of this you kept the same essential idea, the same drivetrain, torque vectoring, all-wheel drive, electric, 1070 horsepower, 1300 kilos, all of that across the board. But then instead of being inspired by a sports car, what if instead of that, this were a kind of super evolution of a WRC idea, or something which almost feels like a modern-day reinterpretation of the Group S rally, or Group B, or Pikes Peak. Something that really feels like a no-rules, extreme horsepower, all-electric, hyper-rally car. Now, of course, that's not what we have, but I think a lot more people would have probably had a lot more time for it, but this is what we do have. And I alluded to some of its specs. 1300 kilos is actually quite good for an electric vehicle. Of course, you have the advantage of it being fictional, so you can pretty much make it whatever you want. 1070 horsepower is also very cool. Were this real, it would be by far the quickest Škoda, and by real, of course, I mean an actual track day vehicle that would be drivable, etc., rather than just a show car. And certain things go without saying. So, for example, like pretty much any other Vision GT, it is 1,000,000 credits. The point level is pretty high on it. It comes with racing medium tyres as well, 853 points, so with a very slight amount of tinkering, or just put it on racing hards instead, you can of course run it in pretty much all of the Vision GT events, which tend to be capped at up around 850. So what's it like to drive? What's it like in practice? Maybe you haven't bothered logging into the game or downloading the patch or even just buying the car. Well, it's a very mixed bag, because on the one hand, technically, it is not slow. It is a very quick car around the track if you compare it to certain other vehicles. Certainly if you compare how quick its lap times are, given that the top speed is actually not very good. Because again, as I talked about before, it tops out around 193 miles an hour, which on paper should mean that most other Vision GTs could wipe the floor with it, regardless of its acceleration, but in practice, that's not the case. It is properly quick. You can win Vision GT events with it, and again, I spoke before about it being around Spa, quicker than the Aston Martin Valkyrie. At the same time though, the Valkyrie was on sports tyres, and this was only a couple of seconds difference, so in the grand scheme of things, it's definitely not as quick as 1,000 horsepower could make it seem. At the same time, the fact that it's electric immediately means that it's next to useless in anything that requires any kind of fuel use, and because of it being a Vision GT, it immediately has a significant amount of people who dislike it from the get-go, so Vision GT cars really are working not from a baseline, but from a deficit. You have to win people over to this idea of it being good, rather than just a new car, which you kind of enter with no expectations, rather than actively negative ones, which is why I think that when a Vision GT car really does push through, something like a Tomahawk for example, it really does end up being a testament to just how undeniably useful a car like that is. I'm not saying every player will use it, but at least every player is well aware that if you want just pure performance, the Tomahawk is where it's at. So it becomes well used just because it's the fastest thing around, so you don't really have a choice if that's the kind of racing that you want to do. It's a good way of making your car essential, really, rather than just a marketing toy. On the other hand, this one feels like a bit of a middle ground. I don't fully feel like it is just a marketing exercise. I do genuinely believe that Škoda, the people involved, did pour their hearts into this, and I want to commend them for that. I want to support them for it, because clearly taking inspiration from, your 1950s racing heritage in the sports car world, from a fairly obscure car for many players, that's not something you would just do for the sake of marketing. If it were just marketing, you'd make like an Octavia with maybe 2 doors instead of 4 and 1,000 horsepower with maybe a wide body. So in other words, pretty much what Mitsubishi and Subaru did with their cars. This one didn't do that. They did try. I think it was just a little bit misguided in terms of if you imagine this being a general concept car versus if you imagine it being in the world of Gran Turismo. Because in real life, it looks badass, its performance would doubtless be tremendous if it can match those real world numbers, but in the game, it just doesn't fit very well into the structure of Gran Turismo. And if we're honest here, that doesn't really have anything to do with the Vision GT program. The biggest crime that this car commits is being electric, not being a Vision GT, because if you take away that aspect, now you've just got a Volkswagen IDR. That's not a Vision GT, it's an awesome car that broke literal lap records at some of the greatest places in the world like Pikes Peak and the Nürburgring, and it's still a useless car in the game. So to me, that is the most disappointing thing. At the very least, making this something like a hybrid, I think would have made it that much more useful. As is, it's a one and done kind of car. It looks cool, it's pretty quick, but it's very unwieldy to drive. I mentioned I had worries about it falling into the same trap that they always do with electric cars for some reason, which is, oh, it's got torque vectoring, but then when you actually get out to the track, it feels like it may as well be front-wheel drive. Because the heaviness, the torque steer, the understeer, it's just so rampant, and it's not quite as bad on this one as it is with some others, so I'll give it credit for that, but it's still not very good. You have to be very cautious with your throttle use because you have that way too excessive torque going to the front, but also a massive amount of horsepower already going to the front, and crucially, horsepower that has no lag. So not only do you have rampant understeer anyway, and you would even with a traditional engine, but the fact that it is instant power because of that electric drive means it accelerates the issue even faster. So you can very easily bounce off a wall or go off the track. So, like I said, it's a mixed bag. I'd love to be able to tell you that I absolutely adore this thing, and it should be a huge deal that Skoda is finally a part of the Gran Turismo family, but it just doesn't feel that way, and that's a shame. The one saving grace that I'm taking away from this car, and I really do hope for this, you know what I'm going to say, I'm hoping that since this clearly means that they have a working relationship with Gran Turismo to some degree, that might mean that we get more Skodas in future. We can only hope as to what those could be. Maybe a Fabia VRS, Octavia VRS, maybe even a rally car of some kind. That would be awesome to me. But that's it for my 2 cents on the Skoda. Of course, tell me yours down below. I could see it being a mixed car. Some people probably would really love it, and others absolutely hate it. I've heard some thoughts either way, and I'm kind of in the middle, I think, on this one. Tomorrow, we will be reviewing the probably even more dull Afeela, but hey, we got to review it anyway, it's in the game, so stick around for that. And of course, check out the Chevy Chevelle review yesterday, which I did as well. But for now, thanks for watching.